Welcome back to News Talk. Pope Francis continues to make news and waves in the Catholic Church, this time regarding abortion. Francis says priests can now forgive women who have ended a pregnancy. It's a new policy, and it's only temporary. Part of what's being called a year of mercy in the Catholic Church. Our John Gonzalez filed this report.
Well, just weeks before Pope Francis arrives here in the D.C. area, he is once again sending shockwaves throughout the world's oldest church. Here at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Rockville, there are strong opinions about abortion, and it is what everyone is talking about this afternoon. In fact, take a look at this. Right in front of the chapel, there is a memorial for the unborn. It was a gift to the church, given to the church by the Knights of Columbus. Well, many traditionalists view abortion as such a grave sin, it warrants automatic excommunication. Until now, forgiveness had to come from a high-ranking official in the church, such as a bishop. Well, this afternoon, Pope Francis has announced, Pope Francis, a man who has become so polarizing and popular in just 2.5 years, says that Catholic priests will be able to absolve women who seek forgiveness for having an abortion.
I love the Pope because he is actually looking out and asking people to come back to the church and including everyone. So even if you've made a decision in your life, he still wants you to be part of the church. He wants to include everyone to the church and bring them back to the Catholic religion. So I think it's fantastic.
The Pope this afternoon says he understands some may disagree, but he says he's met so many different women through the years that felt the need to have an abortion because they believed that they didn't have an option. He writes in his statement, quote, "The forgiveness of God cannot be denied to one who has repented." In Rockville, Maryland, John Gonzalez, News Channel 8.
Thank you, John. Washington Post reporter Sarah Pulliam-Bailey joins us now from the paper's newsroom downtown. And Sarah, it's really great to have you with us today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Just when it seemed that Pope Francis couldn't do more to create waves and surprise many in and out of the church, he's done it again. Fair to say?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Pope Francis is that he is not necessarily changing church doctrine, but he's bringing these older issues back to the forefront, and he's reframing them in a very pastoral manner. So he talks about abortion as a tragedy, as opposed to what, as many might say, a grave sin. It's a very interesting rhetorical shift from before.
Will it seem like a substantive shift and not a reframing or a rephrasing?
Well, I think rhetoric does go a long way. Even just symbolic gestures can go a long way among Catholics. But I think what, again, is sort of clear is that nothing has changed in terms of how the church views abortion. It's just within this particular policy, women might have an easier time getting sort of absolution of their sins and being in good graces with the church.
Can you talk about the year of mercy, what this notion involves?
Yeah, so every 25 to 50 years the church does something called a jubilee, and it's a sort of a year period where you can get blessing and pardon from God, a period where the church encourages Catholics to go back to confession. And this year comes up in December, and it runs through next November. And Pope Francis has deemed this particular jubilee a year of mercy, if you will, and this is where the abortion comments came into play.
You can't help but wonder whether parish priests at the local level will be surprised by the statement, and will they struggle with it?
No, from what we understand, actually priests in the U.S. and in England actually have this power or privilege or right, if you will, or this ability to absolve sins. It's more globally that the Pope was saying, as the Bishop of Rome, I'm granting this right to all priests across the world. But in the U.S., priests already do this.
Does it feel to you as though his experience prior to becoming Pope helped inform the position that he's laid out?
Yeah, yes. Everyone we talk to just says he has such a pastoral approach as opposed to administrative or a doctrinal approach. He was a pastor in Argentina. He was living among the poor. He was working with people on the margins. So he really has those people in mind when he makes these kinds of statements.
Give us your thoughts, if you would, about his upcoming visit. He's going to hit a number of large American cities. He will be here for a few days. Folks will clamor for an opportunity to see him speak, or just in transit. When Pope Benedict was here, people were on the streets of D.C., Maryland, Virginia, hoping for hours just for a glimpse. What expectation do you have? How much anticipation is there already for the for the visit that is, I guess, 3 weeks or so out?
It'll be incredible. It'll be, I've never seen a world church leader, a religious leader, get so much attention from all across the board, whether it's not just Catholics, people who might not even say they're religious are so fascinated by his statements. Everybody wants a piece of him. Everybody loves a little piece of what he says. Maybe it's about immigration, maybe it's about abortion, maybe it's about poverty, the environment. I mean, everyone wants a piece of him. And so I think it'll be huge. He's the first pope to speak to a joint session of Congress, and then he's going to go. He's expected to go out and sort of wave to the lawn, and he's speaking to the United Nations. He's doing a huge mass in Philadelphia. I think this is going to be a big deal. The
address to Congress, I think, could be one of those moments where everyone pauses, everyone who can put work on hold or arrange their schedules to hear what he says for themselves in real time. I think it has the potential to be that kind of moment.
I think so too. I think it's incredible. I mean, TV, from what I understand, is planning to carry it live. I just have not seen this kind of attention. I mean, I can't think of anyone else other than maybe Barack Obama, if Beyonce came here or whatever. I can't think of anyone else who draws this kind of attention and hype and discussion. I mean, the analysis around him is so fascinating.
Indeed. And the news this day is that federal employees are being asked to stay home, figure out some way not to come to work on the day or during the period that the Pope is actually in the district, that he's in town, because of the crush of humanity that's expected and the logistical issues. And the analogy you make, going back to January 2009, may be the one where, with all the excitement connected to Barack Obama's inauguration as president that first time, when so many people were here, federal workers being told, stay home if you possibly can.
Yeah, in Philadelphia, they're expected 1 million to 2 million people just descending upon that city. Can you imagine just logistically, how do you get people around? How do you handle traffic and hotels and all that for a city like Philadelphia?
And it'll be interesting to hear his tone and his approach as he speaks in any venue, because the media and others will be hanging on every word, particularly the address to Congress. What issues does he emphasize? What tone does he take? Is it light? Is it more stern? This will be as fascinating a part of the trip, I think, as any other, is my guess.
Yeah, so part of what I think is interesting is he's expected to speak in Spanish quite a bit. When he speaks to Congress and the UN, he will speak in English, but mostly the rest of his trip will be in Spanish. And I think in general that'll be interesting. But also the issues that he brings up, he talks a lot about poverty, he talks a lot about the family, he talks a lot about the environment. He had an encyclical earlier this year, a major church document that went over what people are doing to the earth. And so I think it'll be, again, sort of a situation where everyone who has their pet issue is going to latch on to whatever they love or hate about him.
Did I read that he considered crossing into the U.S. over the Mexican-U.S. border to show solidarity with the immigrant struggle?
There were rumors about that. I mean, I'm sure there are considerations for everything. He's going to Cuba for 8 days ahead of time, and that in and of itself is a big deal, to come from Cuba directly to the U.S. So I think that'll be interesting, and it'll ramp up some enthusiasm or interest or, discussion about him before he comes.
Sarah, can we talk briefly about the decision of the very Reverend Gary Hall to retire from Washington National Cathedral? He has developed a fairly significant persona inside and outside the cathedral, and it was through your colleague Michelle Borstein that we learned of his decision, I should say, to retire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the National Cathedral is facing some huge challenges financially and just structurally. A couple years ago there was an earthquake in D.C., if you remember, and it caused a lot of damage, millions of dollars of damage to the cathedral. So Gary Hall, the Reverend Gary Hall, as he enters into an older age, he felt like somebody younger needed to step in and raise those millions of dollars to help with just the upkeep, but also the recover from that damage that was done during that earthquake.
And if my understanding is correct, it's the sort of the operating side of things as well. I mean, the construction recovery that you talk about is significant fundraising in and of itself, but running a huge and old church brings its own challenges, not so much capital, but operating too, right?
Yeah, and in the context of, we're learning more and more about how people are less into, Americans are less into institutional religion. They are not identifying with institutional, they may still be praying, they may still be going, to services, but they may not self-identify as Episcopalian or another tradition, and that poses challenges to these massive cathedrals.
Washington Post reporter Sarah Pulliam-Bailey. Appreciate your time very much. Great conversation. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
We're back with more News Talk in just a moment.